Welcome everyone to Personal Rescue here with Margaret, and I am Lee. And we're here today to discuss sleep in first responders and how that affects everything from our physiological and physical aspects of how our bodies feel to the mental aspects and how that can, have some negative impacts when it comes to dealing with PTS and other just overall mental health issues. So, thank you for joining me again today, Margaret. Always lovely to see your
Yeah,
face, and
I'm super excited to
we always
be
have
here.
some we always have some great conversations on trying to educate our brother and sister first responders on how to be healthier and better, and appreciate it. Love having us together on here.
Yeah. I think it's pretty funny because whenever I'm in a room of responders and I say, okay, how's your sleep? Or we're going to talk about sleep, everybody either laughs, like audibly bursts out laughing, or rolls their eyes. And so I'm excited today to do a little bit of a deep dive into sleep topics about how, even with shift work or even with calls that can get you up in the middle of the night if you're paid on call, and mess with your sleep, that it's still possible to make some improvements.
Yep. No, absolutely. And I understand the eye roll because for a lot of us when we get in there, it's almost like a badge of honor of talking with the guys. Well, how many calls did you make last night? And it's like, well, I made five between midnight and 7 a.m. And then you'll hear somebody else another say, well, I made seven. And it's like, we kind of brag about the fact that we ran all night and we're running calls, but ultimately, that is not something you necessarily want to brag about when it comes to our personal, physical, and mental
Yeah.
health. Because I can definitely attest to, after nearly 3 decades of writing, either as a volunteer or a paid responder, man, it will catch up to you. And some of the damage due to that getting up throughout the night on a regular basis and shift work, there's permanent physiological damage that's done. And people don't realize that. So yeah,
So
it's
Lee, so how, I mean, let's just jump right in. So you were a shift worker for a long time, and how did those kind of irregular hours affect your sleep patterns over time? What did you notice?
I didn't know what regular sleep was.
Right.
Really didn't. As a volunteer, it was okay. I responded every night if the tone went off. I was in a small rural area, so we didn't have calls every night, but that tone, you always slept with the anticipation of when is the tone going to drop. I don't want to miss the call.
I
Whereas the
always call
pay,
that I always call that sleeping with one ear open, right? The body
yes,
is primed to, even when you're asleep, you're sort of not asleep.
yeah,
Yeah.
and same as a paid, you don't, boy, you don't want to be the last one on the truck. Um, what I found to me is it didn't take long before I became a really grouchy, irritable person. That
Mhm.
was the first thing I noticed. Um, for us, I worked with Austin. It was a 24 on, 48 off. And so with that, I found that uh, we're one of the few in the nation did noon shift change. Everybody else does morning. So you would run all night, but the policy was like, hey, get your butt up 7 o'clock, whether you ran all night or not. Now, yes, we could sleep in a little bit, but we had stuff to do in the mornings. And so you had to do that. And by the time you got off at noon, there's like, well, now it's afternoon. I got an hour or so drive home. I'm not going to go to sleep. There's stuff I want to do. So really, you're going 2 full days. And then that night, I would find that I'd be so exhausted that you now kind of slip into this delirium state of, I just want to go to bed. You'd lay down and go to bed, but you couldn't fall asleep,
Mhm.
you know, and try to that first night, usually kind of crappy sleep. Then you'd sleep in the next day, you'd have your full day off. And that's usually when things kind of settle down. And that night you'd get a good night's sleep. But then, boom, day three, back at the station. Here you go again.
Yeah.
So I never knew what a regular sleep pattern was until I truly retired.
Yeah.
And even then, I'd say it took a good year for my body to settle into a regular sleep pattern. And that's when it really hit me of like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize how shitty I felt physically and mentally it just was nothing, never apparent until after retirement and that sleep. So
And
for
I'm
me, it was a
always,
lot of mood.
yeah, I'm always shocked that so when I've known firefighters to retire and then I might see them at an event or something a few months later, 6 months, and they look 10 years younger, like what is happening? They're like, I'm sleeping for the first time, right? So really, and I think that's where my curiosity between mind and body has always, it's always fueled that curiosity. It's like, okay, you're sleeping better. And actually you look younger. You look like you're have vitality and energy in a way that a responder who's in the grind doing the shift work or even paid on call responders don't, right? They and
Mhm.
bless their hearts, right? They do it willingly. People sacrifice. That's when we talk about
Yeah.
sacrifice, what people are actually sacrificing. But I think in today's talk, let's dig in a little bit. Let's talk about why sleep is important. I think there's a some kind of old mentality that like I'll sleep when I'm dead or it's fine or I can push through it. I'm functional, I'm good. And let's talk about really why sleep is important, a little bit about the science behind that, and then talk about how we can improve sleep even when we're doing jobs that keep us up all night, even
Yeah.
when you're a shift worker, or even when your circadian rhythm, and we'll talk about that in a minute, is getting jacked by your service.
Yeah, I mean, you look at there's plenty of scientific data and studies that have been done that compare a if you go, let's just take our 24-hour shift. We won't even get into 48-hour shifts
Yeah.
where people are working. Just a 24-hour, and you're up all night, not getting sleep. If you do a cognitive test the next morning, you're considered legally drunk. You're at
Yeah.
the same cognitive state as somebody that is legally drunk. And that's really scary when you think about the liability you put yourself at as a first responder. God, and that's one thing, but think about paramedics that are having to make life or death decisions, and you're talking that decimal point. That decimal point in the wrong place could end up being a fatal dose of something. And you got, fire, at least we got the firehouse
Hmm.
and we're at least have a bed or can try to take a nap. Whereas the medical, EMS, a lot of them live out of a stinking ambulance for
Yeah.
24 hours.
Yeah. There's no
So
napping. Yeah.
yeah, the you start looking at what does that do to our bodies on the scientific level of a cognitive function significantly decreases. Then you throw in hormones. And I kind of look at hormones really dictates a lot on our physical and mental performance and health. And I can attest, I've been on testosterone therapy since age 35-ish. That's pretty young. But that was because I had, 15 years prior to that almost of even a little longer, 16 years of shift work and, running calls. It
Yeah.
didn't take long for me to destroy my T level production. I'm
And you're
seeing
saying that
younger,
was destroyed through sleep and through sleep deprivation and through increased stress levels.
yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Because my diet was always great. I exercised like crazy. I'm not a freak exercise, but I understood I'm a professional athlete. That's what we are. Um, so exercising and my diet
Yeah.
was clean, and yet for some reason I'm like, why are my joints hurting? Here's
Yeah.
another big one that people don't realize. When your T level drops, guess what the first thing to suffer? Sleep. Your
Mm.
sleep, quality of sleep decreases significantly. So, between the body aches, started putting on weight gain, unexplained weight gain, um, to my overall physical abilities went down. I'm like, why am my heart rate's at, 120? I feel like I'm dying, sucking wind. And then my sleep, I would, like I said, come home. And part of that delirium state that I talked about was you're so tired, well, you're just continuing to kick your T levels down and deplete them. Well, guess what? And that's a reason you couldn't sleep. I'd be so exhausted. I'd go to sleep and only sleep 3, 4 hours and then wake up for no reason and couldn't go back to sleep. T levels.
Yeah.
Once I got those testosterone levels, hormone levels adjusted, it was amazing. First thing I noticed went from 3 to 4 hours of sleep to 7, 8 hours within about 2 weeks. Now that's
Which
my
feels
personal,
like the holy grail if you're a responder, right? Some people are
yeah.
like, if I can get 4 hour chunks, I feel I'm good, right? But 7, 8 hour chunks is virtually unheard of. And most people I talk to, most firefighters, this is one of the first questions I ask them because nobody wants to talk about mental health, right? But I say, well, what's going on with sleep at home, not at work if they're full time? And most people will say something like, I'm really tired, but I can't shut my brain off, right? I know I'm exhausted and I lay down and I can fall asleep real fast and then I'm awake for no reason and I don't really get why. So I think before we kind of do a deeper dive into T levels, which is super fascinating, um, let's talk a little bit about why we sleep. Like, what is the function of sleep in general? Like, we all kind of know we should sleep, but really, what is it doing? And for people who are interested in reading or knowing more, there's an amazing book that will scare the pants off of you, but is also really informative called Why We Sleep by Matthew Walker. If people want to read or learn more. Um, but there's basically two functions of sleep, right? And so I'm going to get nerdy here.
Mhm.
And one is to repair the body, right? We need
Yep.
that downtime so cells can do what they need to do so we can fight off illnesses. And two is to consolidate memory, right? What does that
Mhm.
mean? That means our brain needs to make sense of what we saw and did in that day, learn and take what we need to take from it, and put the rest of stuff like, the things that are unuseful that we don't need to store where it goes so it can, we save room, right? It's equivalent of restarting your computer.
Mhm.
But when we don't, so if you think about the job of responders, right, who may and do see a lot of stressful life experiences in other people, critical incidents, gory scenes, upsetting scenarios in all sorts of fashions. When we sleep, the function of the brain is to put memories where they need to go. But what is the lifestyle of a responder? It's sort of like grab a couple hours here, take a nap here, sleep if I can, or there is just not really any consolidated sleep. By that, I mean like in chunks, in hours in
Yep.
a row. And so you have this perfect storm of not sleeping, a lifestyle that often promotes not sleeping, and then traumatic memories. So the brain can't put those memories where they need to go into the right filing cabinet. And where does that leave someone, right? Not only with things like post traumatic stress, with, oh, I can't, like that image just keeps popping in my mind, but the body can't heal, right? The body
Mhm.
and the brain can't heal itself at night. And so a breakdown eventually starts to occur, whether it's physical or mental health. I always do mental health in air quotes, because it is physical health.
Mhm.
So sleep is super important. And if we talked about nothing else in this whole podcast around the struggles of first responders, I would be fine as long as we talked about sleep, because sleep is the foundation of health.
Yes.
And if you read that book, you'll realize. But even not sleeping for a night or two, regular people, right? Not shift workers, not
Mhm.
responders, puts your body in a fight or flight mode,
Yes.
right? So you could just be a new parent or a regular civilian having a stressful time, but and we all have times of insomnia. That's normal, but it puts our body in fight or flight already just by not sleeping. You already mentioned the cognitive decline. You already mentioned that sleep deprivation, um, definitely impacts how our brain functions in terms of being able to make good decisions, and sound judgments, and that's important in the field, right? But when you're starting at a fight or flight level and then you're putting critical incidents or stressful job on top of that, now really, like, now we're looking at a different kind of physiological scenario that's super important that we talk about. So
Yeah, and you talk about on that why we can't sleep. T levels are one part of that, but if you really dive down into the brain, when we look at the mental health, when you don't sleep, you talk about the fight or flight. What is that? When we look at the chemicals associated with that, you're looking at your cortisol levels.
Yeah.
And so when your cortisol gets off, which is a chemical in the brain, then yeah, you're not going to sleep. You'll be restless. It's not deep REM sleep. You start looking at other things like your GABA production, melatonin production. When you're not sleeping and you're under a lot of stress and fight or flight, melatonin starts going down, cortisol gets off whack, and it's supposed to be low at night, so it induces that good quality of sleep. Melatonin kind of comes in and gets you into that restful state, as well as GABA. And in the morning when you wake up, cortisol pumps up because it's like, hey, it's time to get up, and everything else kind of goes the opposite. Well, when you're not sleeping, all that gets thrown off, all of it. And now your cortisol stays high, so you can never calm down because of that fight or flight. Fight or flight will, instigate increases in cortisol levels, which that is one of the main key chemicals in the brain that is responsible for sleep.
And
Then you
weight
start
gain.
adding
And weight gain, right?
weight
We
gain
always talk
to, I
about
mean,
that, like, got kind of like first responder, middle-aged white guy belly, right?
mhm,
And there's
yeah,
jokes, right? But that's like actually cortisol related. I mean, I'm sure there's some other pieces that go into that, right? But that's a cortisol side effect. Yeah.
yeah. And so, yeah, it's a multi-layered, um, I call it negative effects. It's not just one thing like tea or any other chemical. There's a multitude of chemicals in the brain that when they get out of their balance, it affects everything. And usually the first thing is sleep. I could relate to what you talked about on my first part of my career, first 11 years. I was at a really busy station. We ran a lot at night. And then when my firstborn came, it didn't take but 2 weeks, and with her, it was just different. For me, she was a daddy's girl, and then she would only calm down and go to sleep if I got up with her, um, versus the son. So it only took 2 weeks after my firstborn where I was like, I'm out of my damn mind. I
Mhm.
didn't want to go back to work because I thought, well, I'll go back to work to rest. While, I'm at home, I got to take the kiddo. Well, guess what? There was no rest to be had.
Yeah.
And it didn't take me long to go, I either will burn out from this profession and I'm not going to make it, or I'm going to have to make a change. And the one change in the fire service that nobody likes is you're proud to be at a busy station. There's that relationship and that ego that goes with, oh, I ran this many calls. It took a lot, but I was at that point of like, if I don't make a change, I got to go to a slower station.
Hmm.
So slower station does not equate to everybody on, oh, you're a slug or anything like that. And that's the bad part. Us as firefighters and first responders, when you're at a busy place, you have this ego or feel of like, I'm doing the job.
Yeah.
But when you go, I can't mentally, I need a break, I could go somewhere slow, you're automatically labeled a slug. Or it's a negative, there's something negative. I'm like, it should be the other way around. I
Or
think it
you're
should be
like
a,
one of those old retirement guys, or right, like, oh, you can't
yeah,
handle it.
yeah,
There's a secret. It's not very overtly stated, but it's like, oh, you're having issues. You need to go to the slow station.
yeah.
Right. So,
And to me, I got over that real quick
yeah.
because once I got to the slow station, and granted, I went from one of the busiest to, yes, one of the slowest, but it was a different area. We had different challenges, I had different skill sets I got to learn and do. But let me tell you, the fact that we maybe got up once a month at night within the first month of being at that slow station, that was the only good sleep I actually got.
Yeah.
And so when I got home, I was a better father. I was able to be up those next 2 nights with the little one. Um, and then as she got older and that wasn't needed, it was like, you know what? This is kind of nice. I'm sleeping more than being up all night. Just overall, my mental aspect of mental things improved for a time. And physically felt better. So, it is a dance. I call it a dance of the inter workings of the body, and how sleep, like you said, is the foundation. We won't get into the nutrition part of that, but sleep overall,
Yeah.
it affects everything.
Yeah.
And we have to lose that mentality of going, if it was up to me and I was a chief, and especially if you're working a 48-hour straight, and a lot of departments are going to that 48-96, I'd be like, hey, you know what? You are now you're causing a detriment to your employees that are working at busy stations. Work your 24 hours at a busy one, and the next 24, move them to somewhere. It doesn't have to be the slowest, but at least somewhere where they're higher probability of at least getting maybe 5, 6 hours of sleep at night. I know
Yeah.
we can never guarantee that, but I don't see that. And so now you're getting, people 48 straight of no sleep. It's going to exacerbate and accelerate some of the things that you and I already see with patients and first responders. So
Yeah.
I think it has to, and a lot of that is a lack of understanding with the departments on how sleep, on a physiological and mental level, really affects us.
Right.
At
And we
least at the,
know, like in fire departments, right, people have done a lot of mitigating cancer risks by washing gear, right? And because we all realize, oh, like the dirty helmet that used to be super cool is actually creating cancer, right?
yeah.
So, and I don't think we've come quite so far in terms of sleep. I know there's a busy urban station department that I work with, and in their station, all the lights in the middle of the night go on, even if
Hmm.
it's not um,
Your
that certain
call.
rigs, even if it's not your call, exactly. And they all get woken up, or they hear the little noise of the
Tones.
intercom, basically of the radio. There's like little ticks at their body's just primed. So even when it's not their call, all the lights are going on, which is terrible, which is why we see things in departments that are doing something about it, like red lights instead of the normal lights going on, and mitigating the sound and turning radio traffic off the radio in the middle of the night. There's lots of things, but I think it's really important to understand and we can talk about some of those tips and tricks in a bit, but I think what's really important to underline what you're talking about is that sleep is directly related to how your nervous system functions, to how your neurotransmitters do what they need to do. And at the foundation of that, it's about how, from my perspective as a psychologist, how you regulate your mood, right? We all know if we haven't slept well, we're usually hotter, quick to bite someone's head off, or quick to feel irritated, or can go the other direction too, feel anxious or get low. Our mood gets low because we're just not feeling good. So sleep affects how we're able to manage stress, right? And
Yeah.
also increases our risk of things like accidents, right? You talked about
Yep.
kind of cognitive impairment, and it's equivalent to walking around legally drunk. But of course, we don't talk about that.
Mhm.
Right? And so that's kind of the mental health side, but we also know that shift workers, like in public safety, have 50 to 60% higher rates of developing cardiovascular illnesses
Yep.
directly related to their sleep deficits. And then we go, huh,
Absolutely.
what are we seeing in firefighters? What are the killers? Oh, it's cancer. Oh, it's cardiovascular events. And oh yeah, there's trauma too, and they've got some emotional stuff that they need to address, but really it's these heart attacks. I was like, well, let's talk about sleep if we want to really address all of those things where the body can heal and the heart can function in a normal way,
Mhm.
rather than getting jacked all the time or staying in a persistent fight or flight mode.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at cancer, you talked about earlier, the body healing. If you're working 30, 40 years on shift work, you're not allowing the body to heal. Those cells will go rogue. And that's why we see, on top of the exposure
Right.
processes that we get exposed to, but sleep is a huge catalyst for cancer and cancer growth, or increased cancer risk. Cardiovascular disease, definitely, because those hormones and neuroreceptors aren't working, so we get inflammation, and that's not good for the heart and the vessels. So yeah, no, you look at the reason why firemen live 10 years less on average lifespan than the average male. Gee, because If I was to pick kind of like you, one, the big, what is, if there's just one, it would be sleep. To me, sleep uh, even overrides, I would even say nutrition, just because you can eat the most perfect diet, but if you're not allowing the body to heal and repair itself, diets are irrelevant.
Yeah.
You can still have the perfect diet and still be inflamed, still have increased cancer odds. I mean, it just goes on and on. So to me, sleep is the big one. Um, we want to address some of those major health issues, reduce fatalities and early deaths and cancer rates. Address the sleep. It's
Yeah.
sleep.
And mental
Um,
health rates. Yeah.
mental health, and when speaking of that, we talk about the jobs and accidents. I can attest to patient care.
Hmm.
Patient care goes down. Um, you lose the compassion, and we call it compassion fatigue. And I noticed that's when I knew it was time for me to go to another station, because we would get a tone, and before I'd even hear it, I'm cussing and pissed off, and I'm irritated, like, what fucking now? And it's like, wait a minute, that's our job, is to respond. And when I no longer want to respond, or I'm irritated at responding, and I'm like, that's a problem.
Yeah.
And so now when you get through the patient, you're already irritated. You're not giving 100% the best quality of care to that patient. You may do everything right according to policies, procedures, and rules and regulations and what we have to follow for patient care, but our attitude, and I've seen it. I'm guilty of it, and I've seen it with every single person in the fire department that I've worked with in my career. Everybody will have those moments of piss poor attitude with a patient,
Yeah.
and we will let it out. And it's not intentional, it just happens. And that's where we have the problems of, you talk about, we already have a problem with, perception. We'll look at police and fire and everybody else. It's called compassion fatigue, because we don't get sleep, and therefore, yeah, we're going to be short tempered, we're going to be irritable. I'm not going to give the best compassionate care to our patients or interaction in the public that serves us, the department at its fullest, and the patient. So, never
Yeah.
mind, we can add on the other stuff that it could cause, but ultimately, our professions are to serve the public. And if we're not able to do that, then we're doing an injustice to us, the department, and the people we serve.
Yeah.
So,
And oh, sorry.
go
Yeah.
ahead. No,
And
that was it.
fun fact, because I'm going to nerd out here, and it's probably a fact that I'll share. Probably shared before. I'll share again. You're talking about compassion fatigue, which sounds like a psycho mumbo jumbo kind of word, but there's actually neuroscience behind that. When we're in fight or flight, our brain, our front prefrontal cortex doesn't get the right blood flow. And the what area of the brain that's affected is the part of the brain that's responsible for empathy. So when we're in fight or flight, the parts of our brain associated with empathy do not get the regular and correct amount of blood flow to them. So that makes us feel like, I don't feel like dealing with this BS call, and what the hell this time, right? And people and responders who are some of the most absolutely genuine and generous humans I've ever met, it bugs them. They're like, I
Hmm.
used to care, right? I used to feel, caring feelings for patients, even when they were kind of the BS calls, they could
Yep.
get over it, right? I've got a toothache at 2 in the morning, and I
Right.
just don't want to wait till 7 in the morning or 8 when I can call my doctor, right? But that lack of empathy actually lands in my office and says, like, I don't know what's wrong with me, but I don't feel kind anymore, or I snapped at a patient, and that's not me, right? And so compassion fatigue literally is a side effect of some fight or flight going on, and those
Mhm.
the brain's response, which is why we're not able to be as empathic as we might normally be.
Yeah. And again, where does it root from? Sleep. Like
Yeah.
you said, sleep. That it starts there. I don't necessarily have an answer to how that is, other than I did see towards the end of earlier part of my career, it was like hard and fast. If you're with the old timers, 7 o'clock, you get your butt up. Lights are on if you're not up, and It was just like, bro, we got an hour of sleep while the truck didn't run anything. And you're just
Right.
like, okay. And when I first came in, it was like, oh no. So you had the truckies and you had the engine guys, and there was no flip flopping unless they were short or somebody was off. So the engine got hammered every night.
Yeah.
The truck slept in. Now, did they sleep any better? No, because like you said, we had the white lights came on, the tones came off. You're waking up, is that a fire and we need to go? Oh, no, it's the engine. You go back to sleep. We get back. So they're running just like us, unbeknownst to them.
Yeah.
So, look towards my career as it went on. We started swapping, going, hey, I need a break. Cool. Things slowly progressed to where, okay, I need a break. I could ride the ladder. Um, then it progressed to, hey, you're up all night. And then a lot of those captains and chiefs and a little bit of studies coming out on this of going, hey, y'all ran on, I just be up by 9 instead of 7. To now you could take naps. Beforehand, you weren't allowed to take a nap. I can remember a point in time in the department, it was like, napping's not allowed. It's like,
Hmm.
why not? We know we're going to be up all night. I'm going to try to prep for it. No, 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 no. There's no
Yeah.
napping. Um, to where now they're like, hey, if you feel like you need a nap, go take a nap.
Yeah.
So we are seeing the changes of where you can modify change. Obviously, you got to make the calls. But I think we need to do a better job of trying to distribute some breaks in there. If you're at a busy, busy station, why not maybe once a quarter going, hey guys, we're going to swap with some of the, and I'm going to get hate mail on this. That's okay. But it's an option. And I think it's something that behooves both sides of why not take some of the slower guys, your busy guys, and go just for 2 weeks. You're talking maybe two, three, 4 shifts.
For some relief.
Swap and y'all go get a break. And these guys, hey, y'all on a break 3 months out of the year. Gonna hurt you 2 weeks of brush up on skills and stuff like that. And 2 weeks of if you're running, isn't catastrophic. And then they go back to their home, they go back to sleeping. And the guys that love the busy enough, they get their 2 weeks and like, hey, I'm going out of my mind. I
Yeah.
want to go
Well,
back to being busy.
usually you've got to earn your way to the slower stations, right? Or the slower
Yes.
rigs, right? So there's a little like, well, back in my day, I just did that. What are they complaining about? I'm not going back because I already earned my way off of that busy rig, right? But I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit about circadian rhythms and how that's related to sleep, and especially shift workers and people that might be up in the
Yeah.
night.
I had always heard the term, but again, I'd never understood it until I retired. And that circadian rhythm, the body it's pretty magical in the fact that it's programmed to when the sun goes down, we need to go to sleep. The body automatically, under normal healthy conditions, will start initiating these biochemical changes as the sun goes down, prepping you for sleep. And the key is listening to that and going, okay, I'm going to go to sleep because the sun, it's dark outside. Um, and then as the body sleeps and goes through its normal REM cycle and everything else, as the sun comes up, those chemicals and factors like cortisol and all that reverse and change to where when the sun comes up, the body is naturally programmed to get up.
Yeah.
Um, but when you're deficient in the sleep, it's all thrown off. So you never get on a circadian rhythm, especially being at the station. It's always in this, I call state of disarray. It doesn't know, am I supposed to be up or am I supposed to be asleep? And that just continues throughout the days and weeks and months and years. Now that I've retired, I find now that I don't use an alarm clock unless I really have to get up early. Usually if I have to go teach, it's a 4:30, 5:30 wake up. But man, other than that, it's I go to bed as soon as the sun starts going down. I start getting sleepy. I'm not doing anything other than like I'm listening to my body. And then by 8:30, 9 o'clock, I'm in bed. And I'm usually asleep soon after that. And lo and behold, I sleep. We face in a direction to where we'll get the morning sun, but not afternoon. So I leave the blinds open. It's super dark out where we're at. When the sun starts peaking, just a little bit of that daylight, it's amazing how eyes open up,
Yeah.
body just wakes up. And I wake up and hydrate first thing. with some minerals and vitamins, then have kind of let sit out and let that. The biggest thing on that circadian rhythm too that I think is we as humans now in the electronic age don't take advantage of the brain has to go through a waking up process. The body wakes up, but the brain, it takes still about an hour for all those chemicals and receptors to transition from sleep to daytime activity.
Wait, can a
What's the
cup of
first thing?
coffee or an energy drink do that?
No. It'll
What?
accelerate some things, but you're accelerating other chemicals, but not the ones that are really conducive to overall mental
Yeah.
health.
I mean, there's a whole thing we could talk about into
Oh yeah. So,
caffeine
just
use.
alone
So
of, we don't take first thing everybody does, they're getting their coffee and they're, what are they doing? Getting on a phone or a computer, that blue light. That actually throws off certain chemical receptors in the brain
yeah.
because the other receptors haven't woken up yet. And now you start the day off balance versus, hey, for the first hour, don't look at the stupid phone or computer. Yeah, you could have some hydration, have your coffee, but always, all my patients that I work with, I always recommend to them of like, get in front of that window, or if it's nice outside, go outside. And as the sun, get actual sunrise light and
Yes.
daylight for the first hour. And you're getting vitamin D, you're getting those, all those levels of talk about cortisol, serotonin, and everything else. Those are all waking up naturally. And you will find that after that first hour, that changes your day. And so by doing that, of letting the body wake up naturally with sunlight, and then when it's dark, go to bed with at a reasonable hour. Really, you want to be in bed before, really should be asleep 10:30 the latest. We find that if you're up from midnight to 4 time frame, you're throwing those levels off even further and it's harder to get them back on. So you're fighting the body's natural response of, hey, I want to go to bed. Well, now I'm going to go party or I'm going to go drink and do other stuff. So if you can get on that circadian rhythm of listening to the body when it starts getting dark, another thing to do when it starts getting dark to assist that circadian rhythm is don't eat. There's a reason I don't eat after 6 p.m. because if you're like, you know what, I'm going to have me some munchies at 9 o'clock before I go to bed, glucose spikes. I got to now digest something. Well, guess what? I'm taking that energy that needs to be focused on sleep and I just rerouted it. And
Yeah.
now
So
it's
we
going to
have this
digest.
natural clock, right? That we want, our body runs on a natural clock, and the light really helps that. So getting out into sunlight as fast as you can in the first part of the day really helps get that clock regular. Being careful about when your food intake is happening. The light from phones actually tells your brain that it's daylight.
Yep.
So people will lay in bed when they can't sleep and look at phones. I know I've been guilty of that myself, right? But it actually is stimulating the
Hmm.
brain to be like, oh, it's awake time, because the light from the phones is making the brain be awake, right? Or I'm going to watch TV to fall asleep. It's like, no, we're not watching
Yeah.
TV to fall asleep. Or I'm going to drink to fall asleep because that's the only way my body settles down. So
Hmm.
people have all of these kind of
Hoping.
like unhelpful coping strategies
Yes.
for how to get to sleep. But actually, um, if we're drinking to get to sleep, which so many people do, especially if they need to shut off some memories or just their nervous system is jacked, and alcohol works um, short term, right, to
Yep.
feel relaxed. But actually, when you drink before bed, you don't get REM sleep. Right.
Yeah.
And REM sleep is where the memories go, where they need to go, where the body's doing the very important work of sleep. And so people will feel, and some of us know this, right? We know, like, oh, I had 2 glasses of wine last night, I slept like crap. But actually, it's because your brain didn't go into the cycles of sleep it needed to go into.
Yep.
So the memories aren't getting filed, the body's not healing. So we might technically be asleep, but actually not getting any healing benefits of sleep.
Yep.
So alcohol is a big no-no, which is also a hard thing to talk about in first responders. But so we're talking about morning sunlight exposure for like 15, 20 minutes when you can in the morning. That's a
Yep.
thing you can do. Reducing eating late at night, that's a thing you can do. And if you don't have access to the sun, like where I live in Minnesota, sometimes really dark. And we have long winters, right?
Yes.
Light boxes are great. You can order those off Amazon, right? So sitting in front of a light box for 30 minutes or so can stimulate that morning natural light. Your normal lights in your house won't do that.
Yeah.
Um,
IR and red light therapy is another option too. That's
yeah,
going to
what's
stimulate
that?
cellular
What is
activity.
that? What are you talking
So
about?
infrared and red light
Yeah.
therapy is you can get a bulb to full walls to, I prefer the saunas that you sit in, and it's all infrared and red light. Those wavelengths, you have both because one penetrates more than the other into the body, but it spurs just cellular activity and healing and kind of kick starts everything off. I like it because you can sit in front of it and touch that, and there's no heat, yet you can feel that heat from inside due to that cellular activity. And it does. You talk about healing. That's a great way of waking up in the morning. I prefer in the winter to get up, cold plunge, and then to naturally warm up. If it's cold outside, I'm not going to sit outside. I'll go sit in front of the red light and infrared box for about 20 minutes and naturally warm up. And that to me is the same as during the summer when I'm sitting out in the sunlight warming up. You're getting that kind of accelerated waking of the body naturally and spurring those, dopamine levels and endorphins and stuff like that that we want to naturally get going. Is another option. So red light infrared therapy is great at cellular rejuvenation and healing. It's a
Interesting.
natural wave length that benefits the body. Another thing at night that people don't realize, you talked about TVs and phones. Something as simple as that stinking clock light, the light emitted off of a clock or a cable box, could be enough to disrupt your circadian rhythm because I can't explain it. All I know is that in my room, I don't have any clocks. I don't have anything that emits a light because I swear, even that little bit of light, it wakes me up for whatever reason, and I'll be like, "Where's that coming from?" It's an aggravation to me, and maybe it is because of it does disturb that rhythm that our bodies are trying to get into. But just that minute amount of light can make a huge difference in sleep quality. So I always recommend to people too, of like, turn the clock upside down, put something in front of it, cable boxes, turn them around, or put a piece of tape over the power button. You want your room completely dark. The darker, the better.
So you mean
So
you're not supposed to check your phone when you wake up in the middle of the night and say, "Oh God, it's 2 in the morning. I only have 3 hours of sleep left," and then keep looking at how long have I been awake? You're saying that that's not a good strategy?
no, that's why you got an alarm. so uh,
Yeah.
so yeah,
So,
anytime we want to eliminate all light sources to really get the best circadian rhythm going, established, because again, notice when it gets dark, we naturally get tired. It's our body's starting to prep. You go into something, you're using a little bit of light, the body doesn't know, oh, is that sunlight trying to come up? Is it my phone? But it knows, it can sense that. So to me, I want it completely dark. That's why when I travel, man, curtains, I unplug stuff in the hotel room and everything else. I like it dark. Another thing you can do to assist with that rhythm naturally is add white noise.
mhm.
You could add like just a fan. Is great that white noise really helps the brain to relax. And to me, I can't sleep anywhere where it's dead silent. That actually messes with me. That bothers me.
Yeah.
I travel with a fan. I get made fun of all the time. Travel with my own fan. I'm like, yep, I got to have white noise.
There's an app for that, but yeah.
I tried the apps. It's not the same. So I lug a little stinking fan around.
So, Lee, I'm wondering, can you talk a little bit about supplements for sleep? I mean, you mentioned melatonin before. I think people have often
Yeah.
experimented with it. I think it's good for short-term use. But can you talk a little bit about supplements?
Yeah. So melatonin is one I always see a lot of people take. And I'll be honest with you, the only people I recommend for melatonin are my cancer patients,
Hmm.
because of the cellular, increase of NK cell production. For sleep, though, here's the problem, and they have to work around this as well. When I take melatonin, that is a chemical that the brain senses, oh, you're taking it, I will stop producing it.
Right. Because it's a
So
naturally occurring chemical in your brain that
yeah,
happens when it starts getting dark.
yeah. So if you start taking melatonin, you stop producing melatonin.
Yeah.
And really, anything over 5 milligrams is not the best for brain cell health. It actually can be a detriment. So I'm not a fan of melatonin yet. I know most people, I know people taking 20 milligrams. I'm like, that's an awful lot. Problem is when they go, this stuff doesn't work and they get off of it, their sleep even gets worse temporarily. It's going to take
Mm-hmm.
it about 6 weeks for that body to start producing melatonin again. So I look at going, I don't recommend or advise melatonin supplements because of that reason. If you want to look at a good natural supplementation, there's two. Um, we need to look at GABA. GABA is a chemical the brain makes for sleep that actually helps also induce REM. And I can supplement GABA and it not affect my normal production.
Okay.
So GABA is a great supplement that one could look at taking for sleep. The other, and I'll probably say the biggest one overall that would make the most difference is magnesium.
Yay, I was hoping you would say that.
Most,
Yeah.
oh yeah, most people are deficient in magnesium.
Yeah.
Now, and this is where it gets complicated because there's all kinds of different magnesiums. You got magnesiums specific for gut health, bowel movements, and stuff of that nature. Uh, and I won't go into the specifics, but there's usually it's going to be patient dependent too, of
Hmm.
understanding what your diet look like, a whole multitude of factors, and then we can actually do some testing on that. But there's specific magnesium supplements. I don't want the ones necessarily for gut. I want the ones for brain health, and we can supplement with low dose magnesium right before bed, and lo and behold, magnesium is a calming, it helps the brain relax and helps induce a healthy sleep cycle.
And
Um,
good for muscle recovery, right? So,
Muscle, I mean, magnesium is a really critical
yeah.
mineral that most people think, well, I eat lots of greens. I'm like, well, if you boil them, you just boil it all out. Heating or a lot of the GMO products of food nowadays grown have zero nutritional benefits. That stuff is genetically modified to not benefit you one way other than to make you feel full. So
Mhm.
we do have to supplement with magnesium. So magnesium to me is a big one. Salt, making sure your sodium intake via a Celtic sea salt or pink Himalayan sea salt. Make sure it's not from China, so you're not getting all the nasty metals. So a good salt, not table salt, but one of those two specifically, those sodium levels are great for, again, muscle health, but calming the brain. And, a lot of people talk about restless syndrome and cramps and muscles because we don't hydrate enough. Add a pinch of salt to some water before you go to bed or when you wake up in the morning. Now you're going to be able to hydrate better because now that magnesium allows the body to actually absorb more of the water than just flush it through. So to me, I would say if there was one I would look at, it'd be magnesium. We can even go further into that, which being in the CBD and cannabis world of things, CBD is another huge component to sleep because you have a C1 and 2 receptor in the body. One's for the physiological side, the other's for the mental. The We do not get enough cannabinoids, and CBD is not THC. CBD is from the hemp plant, and the cannabinoids that plant makes is the only plant source and way that we can actually get the amounts that we actually need. Yes, you can get a little in coconut oil, certain fruits and vegetables, so minute, not getting enough. I'm talking, there's people that we can do a test on them too to figure out where your cannabinoid profile is. I have to take 120 milligrams. It's where my body, through testing, that's what it needs. So I have to take 120 milligrams of CBD and I take it at night. And I notice a substantial difference on that because I'm feeding that receptor that's responsible for the cognitive aspects of things. I call it cognitive. It helps with cognitive balance, balancing those chemicals. If I'm deficient in something, that plant can sufficiently supply what I need. And so to me, CBD is another huge one because there's nothing else out there that we can get those cannabinoids in the
Mm.
right amount to do any good. So magnesium and CBD together, pretty fantastic.
Nice.
I think with some of those, you got to, it's not an immediate notice. You got to play with obviously the amounts you take in, the person, their lifestyle, dietary. There's a lot that encompasses. It's not just a wonder fix all. But I
Yeah.
would say for one of the quickest, addressing those T levels and then CBD, I found for a lot of responders, because a lot of them don't want to mess with, oh, I don't believe in the magnesium and melatonin. But CBD, by gosh, they're interested in, and rightfully so, because it can have the most dramatic impact on mood and sleep. So we talk about the healing of how sleep heals the body. Well, guess what? Cannabinoids, there is a healing process at a cellular level that goes on. So to me, I can add CBD to our dietary intake and offset. I think it'll help compensate when you're at a busy station or you're not getting good sleep right now due to stress or life situations. Increase that CBD level. It'll compensate. Next thing you know, sweet, I'm getting this sleep now. When life kind of settles down and you go back to normal, lower your dose. I love using CBD because I can use it as a floating scale to compensate depending on what life's throwing at me.
Yeah.
Um, so CBD is another key um, supplement that actually does tremendous benefits. There's lots of studies, lots of scientific studies when it comes to CBD use and sleep and overall health. And we talked about cancer, talked about the cardiovascular system. Guess what? Those cannabinoids help in all of that too. So it's kind of
Mm.
it is a miracle plan of it addresses a lot of things. I see the biggest benefit is the sleep and mental health aspect of it.
Yeah. So speaking of mental health, there's a thing that we haven't really touched on here, which is when someone is struggling with symptoms of post-traumatic stress, or they've just worked a critical incident and they may have some kind of acute stress that's not full-blown PTS yet, and dealing with trauma memories and how sleep is often the first thing to get disrupted when we've experienced some high stress event, right? And in those situations, I mean, I will defer to you here, but a magnesium isn't really going to do it, right? When we're getting woken up with
No.
night terrors, nightmares, when the body is that amped. So kind of some of the things you've been talking about are really good for that general sleep challenges, I guess, like
Hmm.
kind of the general experience of responders. But when you're in a post-traumatic stress territory, things start to look different, right?
Yep.
So we know when we've worked a critical incident, when they've got some symptoms of post-traumatic stress going on, sleep is always disrupted. And people will often, even when they're functioning really well during the day, that's when their symptoms will get them, is when they go to bed, because ghosts will be popping up in their mind. They'll be waking up clutching their chest, like like
Yep.
having had to fight in their sleep. I've talked to responders who have accidentally been punching their partner next to them because they're having such fitful nightmares. That's particular to law enforcement that I've worked with, who are having memories of being in altercations and fighting for their lives or trying to wrestle a gun away. Firefighters will talk about what happens in their nightmares of, like, it's a car wreck similar to a wreck I worked, except it's all my family sitting in the back seat. It's not the actual patient. And these kind of warped nightmares that will start to occur for responders that don't really make sense and aren't exactly like the real lived situation, but are kind of a wonky version of a real life situation. And so a magnesium, a salt, right, melatonin, they're not going to touch those really. People are going to
Hmm.
blow
No.
right through those. And so I guess I'm wondering what you do around that, or what you might say about how to take care of those nightmares. I have a few things I always recommend, but what do you usually recommend?
Well, recommendation wise, I will obviously CBD huge. CBD is legal.
Yeah.
And as long as if you're with a department that has a zero THC policy, look for a broad spectrum CBD. Make sure it's third party independent tested. That's probably one of the most critical things. Know what you're getting. So you don't have to worry about the THC aspect. The CBD in itself, I have found working with first responders for the last almost 7 years, having been in the cannabinoid arena of therapy, that really, we talked about how it helps with sleep, but it really helps with reducing those nightmares and triggers. We use it for detox, part of detoxing on alcohol, you're going to have some of those shakes and withdrawals and all that. Well, it's going to help lessen that as well. So when we're looking at the brain and I'm dealing with trauma and stress, again, if we're deficient in certain things that the body's not able to process that healthily in a healthy way, it's just going to build. So to me, I think CBD, if we're talking general availability to everyone, a high quality CBD is that's what I go to first off, right off
Yeah.
the bat.
We get it. You're the CBD guy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
CBD guy. Now you add in, there's THC. There's some places, states and departments where THC is legal. I'm torn. I think it has benefits in that on helping the anxiety portion of that. At the same time, I think there's a lot of people that cannot. THC actually works the opposite. It can,
Yeah.
especially when you talk about we won't even nerd out, but a sativa versus an indica. Sativa is going to ramp people up, and others it doesn't. For me,
Yeah.
sativa is a no-go. It makes me paranoid and everything else. Indica's where I have to be, and that's a good part of the hemp plant. And CBD is it's you can get these now. We're looking at compounds. A good example, and all around CBD is going to have CBG, and there's another compound called CBN. The CBN is a relaxant. It really shuts the mind and body off. 5 milligrams of CBN is equivalent to about 10 milligrams of Valium, but you don't have the negative consequences like you do with Valium. It's just a relaxant. So if you can really find a good quality CBD with that CBN, about 5 milligrams is more than enough. Some people it's 10. Fantastic for the reduction and or elimination of some of the nightmares and triggers. THC, it can be one of those you have to play with and really watch the patient. And to me, I don't find as much benefit on the THC side as I do the CBD side. CBD
Which is
allows me
interesting
to,
because there's like this whole THC boom now that it's legal, right? And people are using it to self-medicate when it actually can sometimes backfire,
yeah,
right?
I look at
Yeah.
CBD, there is no cognitive impairment. I can
Mhm.
take it, go to work, and perform and have zero cognitive impairment. THC, there is a cognitive impairment. So, what's going on with that? To me, and this is my opinion, I think why THC is such a big, it's the go to, it's an escape.
Yeah.
There's a difference between an escape and healthy coping and working through that trauma.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with escaping now and then, but ultimately, I think where too many people fall into the trap is I'll just continue to escape on a daily basis instead
Yeah.
of deal with that trauma. So there's
Yeah.
kind of my separation of the two. The other one that we hadn't talked about and then is super controversial is psychedelic therapy and psilocybin.
For sleep
We
or for trauma memories? What are you talking about?
both.
Okay.
Because if I'm not dealing with the mental trauma, guess what? I'm not in fight or flight. Therefore, I'm going to be able to sleep better and get better
Yes.
quality of sleep.
Right.
So, if we're looking at the disruption of sleep due to mental trauma, what do we have to do? I look at the mental traumas. What gets us going? Triggers. There's going to be mental triggers, uh, a noise or those thoughts,
Or an intersection or a person
anything.
that looks like
Yeah.
that or yeah.
And then they're reliving that for the day.
Yeah.
or by God, they're watching TV before bed and they have something that triggers something. So I look at, to me, if we're looking at genuine, more comprehensive healing of traumas, I think CBD is a fantastic one. And then where applicable and where it's legal, it's in a weird gray area. So we won't even get into the politics.
Right.
But to me, psilocybin is a fantastic healing mechanism because it allows us to break down the barriers and the walls to cope and deal with those demons and triggers.
Yeah. And I
Um,
know we're going to talk about psychedelics in another
yeah.
episode. But I think you're highlighting something super important, which is talking about the real healing, right? We can deal with the symptoms. We can take anti-anxiety drugs. We can take a Unisom or a Benadryl or knock ourselves out to try to get some sleep. But when you haven't dealt with putting the memories where they need to go, with
Yeah.
addressing whatever physical, emotional, mental pain is surrounding that critical incident, assuming that's what we're talking about,
Yeah.
traumatic experiences, then we're just putting band-aids on until we actually deal with the memories. And we can drink all the THC drinks and pop the gummies as much as we can, but until we actually deal with the memories and make our peace with that, and that I have a lot to say about that. That's what I do, is that all the other things are kind of band-aids on top, right? Even when we're reaching for a drink. And I actually don't agree with the word escape. It's not untrue, but I see people's reach, like it's a reach for relief, right? Even if I'm going to pour
Mhm.
myself a whiskey, or if I'm going to pop a THC gummy, it's a reach for relief from
Yes.
the dysregulation and the nervous system and the memories that are all happening at the same time. And there's one thing we haven't talked about pharmaceuticals here, and I get a lot of questions from responders who are struggling with symptoms of post-traumatic stress about, like, well, what do you think about the drugs that my doctor wants to put me on? Or the psychiatrist suggested this. What do you think? Do you think I need those drugs? And I'm, like, my personal opinion, not a huge fan of pharmaceuticals. There's a lot of side effects. There's a lot of actually not great evidence for them. But for traumatic stress nightmares, there is a drug I've seen people have a lot of benefits with, and that's with prazosin, which was, maybe you can speak to this or not, but it was discovered because it was a blood pressure drug, and then they realized that nightmares went away for people. And I think when people are having extremely disrupted sleep, and I'm talking about post-traumatic stress symptoms that have usually gone on a long time,
Mhm.
people are getting maybe 1 to 2 hours a night for a long period of time, which really unravels someone's life and ability to work, function, be with their family, do the things that make them them. Pharmaceutical, there is a time and a place for a pharmaceutical, which is like, we
Absolutely.
need to get you to sleep, right? If someone's having a manic episode, we're not going to be medicating with CBD, right? We're going to be, well, we might put some of that on board, but
Yeah.
that person needs to get some sleep. Otherwise they're going to have a psychotic break, right? So there is a time and place for pharmaceuticals. Prazosin is what I've seen work really well with nightmares, in traumatic stress nightmares in particular. And then
I've
I'm hoping, yeah, give me a second.
Yep.
I'm hoping we can talk about some practical, because we actually also haven't talked about some behavioral things that people can do to improve
Yes.
their sleep. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, I'm
So on the
tossing it to
nightmare
you. Go ahead.
side, I've never had nightmares, or at least if I did, I don't recall.
Good. Thank your
So I've
lucky
never had the
stars, because I
nightmare
think
issue.
they're really scary for people.
No, absolutely. And so now with that, I think again, there's a culmination of therapies that we can combine for the best outcome. I agree with you. Overall, for general pharmaceutical for long-term use, absolutely not. That's just my opinion. I've seen more detrimental effects long-term. Short-term, absolutely. There's a time and place for everything. I needed it when I went through my PTSD symptom. Mine was more of the severe depression of couldn't get out of bed, didn't want to do anything, talk to
Yeah.
anybody. I mean, I just laid in bed, wouldn't eat. And so I tried to fight through it the best I could. And this was before CBD even. And my therapist was like, here's the deal. I'm going to give you something, but you're only getting it for 6 weeks, and then you're getting off of it, and we're going to wean you off. So you got 6 weeks to get your shit together, and this is going to help. I don't want you using this as a crutch or the staple for the long term. And she wouldn't. And that's what I can benefit from that. And I attest to, man, once that got on board, that got me motivated enough to get out of that hole and start the constructive work process on working on
Yes.
myself.
So when
And
people
then,
are in crisis or not
yeah,
functioning, that's a
yeah,
time and place for
I was
pharmaceuticals. Yeah.
non-functional.
Yeah.
And so that got me to functioning. And then, yeah, we weaned off of it, and it was like, so absolutely, I think there's a time and place for temporary modalities to help us through those things. It's where the long term gets into. I agree with you. Long term's not beneficial for most. There's some, but for most, it's not. As
And the
far as,
questions I
yeah,
get a lot of the time are like, yeah, but I don't like the sexual side effects, right? Like, right, of antidepressants in particular,
yeah.
right? But yeah.
And
Anyway,
the goal is like, well, this is temporary. Let's work on your mental aspects of things now. That'll get better. It'll come. So yeah, we have to work with each patient individually. As far as establishing, I call it my sleep ritual. I wrote down some things of, I always go over with patients like, I don't expect you to do all these. I'm giving you a whole slew of things. You pick and choose what works best for you. Start with one and build up to what suits you. Because everybody's different. But, some things we can do, we already talked about, no electronics in dark rooms, no eating late, uh, meditation,
mhm.
having that quiet time. And I think that's really hard when you're dealing with first responder and we're dealing with mental trauma of quiet. We don't like quiet. Um, but having some meditation, I'm not talking 30 minutes or 60, 5, 10 minutes of just meditation where they're just sitting in quiet and reflection, trying to find that reflection and meditating. For some people, it's really hard. Others, not so much. And there's so many different forms of meditation. I go find one that works for you, whether it's sitting and meditating, whether it's yoga, stretching. I'll tell you where I do most. My meditation is the form of exercise. Getting good exercise is part of that healthy lifestyle. I don't recommend going and exercising before bed,
Nope.
but getting up in the morning and after you kind of go through your wake up ritual, part of your sleep ritual is in the morning, get up and work your rear end off. Push your body physically and mentally on a good workout. I find I put myself into a zone to where I'm working out, but I'm very creative and I'm working on me because I'm in this zone of nothing else matters right now but me
I
and
think that's
pushing.
what you're saying. I love that you said in the zone because a lot of responders in general, meditation sounds woo woo or weird or something monks do in India or right. But meditation, there's
Yeah,
actually a huge amount of scientific literature behind it. It's positive outcomes in terms of physical health, pain, mood, lots of conditions. And meditation can look many different ways. And it really is,
yes,
how do you get in the zone, right? For some people, it's running. For some people, it's woodworking. For some people, it's I'm in the zone when I'm sitting in the deer stand. For
yeah,
me, it's when I'm dancing, right?
hmm,
So, I mean, and not to do those, we can't always do those things every day,
right,
but if you're pushing your body and if you're finding a time where you're in the zone and in the zone means like my mind's not wandering a million places
yeah,
because I'm just right here
yeah,
present. There are, if you can learn a formal meditation, right? Like
yeah,
through there's free apps like Calm or Insight Timer or
yep,
Headspace. I know some fire departments are using, on the cutting edge or doing yoga and meditation as a shift, which is I think incredible. But even a lot of firefighters know box breathing, right? And
you beat me to it. I was fixing to say breathing
breathing.
exercises. And if at night, instead of working out, if you have some red light and infrared therapy, sit in front of that for 5 minutes and focus on breathing, deep
Breathing.
breathing exercises to box breathing to there's various forms of breathing exercises.
Yeah. And you got to find one you
If I
like.
sit in front of that red light and then work and focus on my breathing, that is a form of meditation. And what you're doing is I'm bringing everything down to relax my mind and body to therefore be ready to go to sleep. So something as simple as just breathing, even if you don't have red light therapy, do some breathing. Do some constructive breathing meditation.
Intentional breathing. I mean, hopefully we're
Yeah.
all breathing, right? But
Well, yes.
intentional deep belly breathing
Yep.
is the best,
Um,
because that actually directly, it's the fastest way to impact the nervous system.
yep.
And there's a whole host of things we could say about that. But for people who are parents out there, how do we put our kids to bed? We don't just like throw them in their room and say, see you tomorrow, right? There's like a bedtime routine. Okay, well, we're
Yes.
going to brush our teeth. We're going to wash our face. We might even take
Yes.
a warm bath. We're going to have a story. My kids ask for
Yes.
massages, right? So there is a general gradual bedtime ritual that we do for children organically, but somehow as we become older, we stop doing that. We just go, oh shit, it's 10:30, I got to get to bed. And we throw
Yeah.
ourselves in the bed, and then we're on our phone scrolling for God knows how long. And then we're like, why does my sleep suck?
Yeah.
Right. So, but if you put together a little routine that works for
Yes.
you, whether it's a warm shower, a stretch, like a cup of magnesium, drink, that's what I do if I know I might have a difficulty sleeping one night. Um, that can be really like, what are our rituals and our routines
Yeah.
that help ease the body down to
Right.
sleep rather than lay
And
down and go,
time.
oh crap, what's tonight going to be?
And drew it in, like we do with our kiddos. Bedtime's at 8 o'clock. We start that ritual. Well, the same needs to go for you. Start at a consistent time every night
Yeah.
instead of all over the place. Build a consistency with that. And you talk about warm shower. What we also find out, what is the phone? Everybody they like the dopamine release. I can substitute that dopamine release and actually get without getting an elevated response elsewhere. You won't like it, maybe so, but a cold shower, a quick 2-3 minute cold shower gets you going initially, but you're getting a dopamine release. And then when you get out and you naturally warm up in bed, you're relaxing. So to me, I found with a lot of people, a quick little cold shower, you hop out, dry out, and then you warm up in the bed. And just it really, there's some therapeutic tendencies to that.
I
On
hadn't
top
heard
of
about
that,
that one. Yeah. I
yeah,
think it's
it's
really about finding what works for you,
yep,
right? So,
yep.
I mean,
Another
this
thing
is,
to add to that we hadn't mentioned and I had never talked to you about is grounding sheets. So
well,
grounding,
now you're really getting woo-woo, Lee.
I
So,
am getting woo woo. I called it woo woo too. I was like, oh, that's a bunch of bullshit. That stuff doesn't work. And then I started taking shoes off and grounding outside. I'm like, no, that works. I'm like, okay, the concept is the same, except they're not bringing the yard into my bed. Looked at grounding sheets, bought one, and lo and behold, the first night I was on it, I slept fantastic. I slept better than normal, and I woke up without my usual aches and pains because I'm a side sleeper. And I was like, okay, it may be woo woo, but it
what the heck
works.
is a grounding sheet, Lee, for those people who might not know what you're talking about?
It's it's a sheet and it's got thin wiring that you don't feel in it, or they even come in mats. And you plug it into your plug instead of the two regular plugs. You've got your ground. It's the little hole on your plugs receptacle. It snaps a wire into that sheet and it's a single and it goes into that ground. So you're getting a low frequency grounding current that goes through that helps lower the body's just anxiety. We're getting into energy work. We could have a whole discussion on that in itself, but I'm putting the body's energy into almost like a neutral and a place of just calm and relaxation. It's not something that's like, oh my God, I can sit in it and I feel it. It's noticeable though.
Yeah.
And
And
so I
there's
think,
research starting to come out about it reducing inflammation in the body, helping sleep. And it is designed to mimic, like when we go camping or we spend time in
yeah,
nature, right? Which is why you're talking about taking shoes off and putting your feet in the earth, because the earth has a natural healing vibration.
Yes.
Energetically, and we'll save some of the energy talk for another time, but those sheets are mimicking that in
Yeah.
theory, right?
Yeah.
So
And
those
so,
can be really helpful. I know I bought them for all my family for Christmas, and everyone was like, that's nuts. And then they were like, oh, hold on a second. And then my dog and my cat will find that one grounding mat, and that's where they want to be. Like, well, what's that about, right? So
yeah.
yeah, those can be helpful. They're not going to solve post-traumatic stress nightmares, but it might help the body dial down a little bit, right?
Yeah.
So okay, so you and I could probably talk about this forever, but I want to at least summarize some of the points that we're talking
Yeah.
about, right? About how to optimize your sleep quality, right? Or how to improve it in some way.
Mhm.
One is focusing on the environment, dark,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Darkness, no screens, maybe some white noise. Those are some
Yep.
things. And sometimes people have to work this out with family members, about protecting their sleep. And often it's a hard conversation that spouses need to have, because somebody's got to get up for work at 5 a.m. and they might be disrupting their responder, or sometimes it requires some conversation and negotiations at home about how we protect sleep.
Yes.
So that's one piece. Then, so we've talked about screen exposure. We've talked about getting some exercise during the day, which helps the body feel more tired. We talked about breathing strategies and meditation strategies. We've talked a little bit about caffeine, but you want to limit caffeine intake,
Yep.
right? Because caffeine has a shelf life of, like, think about 8 hours
Yep.
plus in the body. Um, so right, so limiting it by noon or so is
Yeah.
usually what people talk about. Days off,
Supplementation.
yeah,
Yeah.
supplementation, right? And the magnesium for sure. Maybe staying away from regular use of melatonin. Um, what else? What else am I missing? Oh, days off,
Days off.
right? Days off, focus on sleep. And also something that I always recommend, and we've talked about it without really talking about it, is nature time, getting outside, getting sunlight, working on regulating
Yes.
those circadian rhythms. Outside time is really helpful. Even if you're on shift, if you can get intention, like just go sit outside on a bench
Yeah.
or take a walk around the station, something like that can be super helpful. Um, yeah,
Hydration too. Just good
there you go.
hydrate. So, so yeah, no, I mean, cumulatively, yeah, I look at, tell people one thing is not going to be the magic bullet. We're going to have
Correct.
to morph and create a comprehensive process and system that works for you and your body. Um, so I think it's very individualized, and that's what I love about it, is you do what works for you, but you're going to have to go through that process of finding out what works, what doesn't work, and start mixing and matching things. And then, even then, you can kind of get into some things of like, sometimes mixing and matching of certain things doesn't fit a certain person. Um, but it's unique. It's unique to each individual. The thing that I think we do is offer them multiple options and avenues, and we educate those patients on, here's everything you can do. Now it's up to you to do it. Now you have to put that energy and effort into just start with one, then go to two, and then we'll build on that. But once they start seeing progress, that motivation starts kicking in, and they're anxious to go, what else now? What else can I do? And so it's just getting the
Yeah.
ball rolling. Once we can get that patient feeling some relief and the benefits, then they're more apt to go, okay, you're not, even it's though it's woo woo, it works. What
Yeah.
else do you got for me?
And
So
so you and I are talking about a lot of self-help kind of strategies that people
yes.
can do on their own. But I also just want to make sure we mention things like doing a sleep study. A lot of people have undiagnosed sleep apnea. That can be super
Yes.
helpful if that's properly treated. And also people in my line of work, there are sleep specialists that
Mhm.
do a kind of intervention called cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, which is a short very focused intervention about how to deal with some of our unhelpful thought patterns that happen when we're sleeping and how to stop doing them so we can get better sleep and also fix some of the behaviors that we have in night that might not be so helpful. One of the things people can do on their own is if you're having a fitful night's sleep, you're in the middle, it's 3 a.m, you're tossing and turning, you've been tossing and turning for half an hour, get up, right? So if you're tossing and turning for 20 to 30 minutes, get up and go do something boring, right? Not get up and go watch an action movie in the living room, but get up and go read something that's not exciting. Do something boring until you naturally start to get sleepy again. But we don't want to make bed a place of having bad experiences, or be like, oh shit, now it's bedtime and I'm going to toss and turn all night.
Yeah.
So it's about training the body. That's not what we do here. If we're not sleeping, we get up. So that's another thing people can try.
And I
So
think you
sleep
brought on
studies,
too.
psychologists that specialize in
Yes.
CBTI is what that's called. And then pharmaceuticals, people have to make their own decisions about that. There are certainly lots of sleep drugs out there. I'm personally not a huge fan unless it's a particular time and place, but yeah, what would you add to?
Yeah, well, I think you hit it. It's like, don't forget, whole process of this podcast is to offer some things to get people going on their own, but ultimately these are stepping stones, and don't don't hesitate to reach out to you or I mean, that's what we're here for. And we can dive deep into the weeds to accelerate and work on genuine healing that's long term and lasting. So,
Yeah.
it is a culmination of professional therapists and providers and practitioners that we work with each other for the patient. And that's what I love about what you and I do is we work together on finding out what is best for this patient, and we put the meeting of the minds together and come up with a comprehensive plan, not just for us but anybody. I work with multiple doctors and therapists of like, what is it that they're lacking that maybe you're not the expert in that I could bring to the table that's valuable, and accelerating what you do to get them that help. How do we accelerate that process? So don't hesitate to reach out to professionals. That's what we do is work in this arena of, of healing and fixing these things. So um, I love it. Love
So
it.
I think as my closing message would be really, if you're a responder listening to this, please prioritize your sleep. Do something. Take one tidbit from this conversation and see, oh, what if I could change that one thing? Because prioritizing sleep is really a key element in being resilient and being able to have a healthy, long career. Just like we train and plan for staying safe, right? Let's train and plan for staying healthy, which includes and is the most important thing, which is sleep. So,
Yes, I would agree.
and it
You hit
takes
it on
time.
the head.
It takes time. It takes
Yeah,
practice. Yeah, but
but
just
once you
take a
get it
small
going,
step. Yeah.
it becomes second nature. You don't even think about it. So, well,
Yep.
awesome. Well, I appreciate everything today. I thought this was a fantastic kind of diving into some weeds of processes and things to do to help sleep issues with responders. So,
Yeah.
as always, it was great, and everybody stay tuned. We got a long list of stuff coming down the pipeline of other things. I think we're looking at here we are. Sleep was our latest. We got some stuff on diet, exercise, nature, which we talked about a little bit in here, hobbying, retirements, identity. I mean, we got a never-ending list of topics to dive into as it pertains to first responders and their health. So until next time, we'll put how to reach Margaret and I down below in the comments with links. So feel free to reach out to us. We work with people all across the nation. So if you need something, reach out. But until then, y'all take care of each other, be safe, and we'll talk to you next time.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.